Welcome to Toll 101, Introduction to Tolling, Toll Principles and Practices. This program is made possible through funding provided by Aegis Projects, Inc., and with the additional cooperation of Atkins, Valencia College in Orlando, Florida, and Patterson-Bach Communications. Hello, I'm Marty Stone, Chief Operating Officer of Aegis Projects USA, a division of Aegis Group, and I'm joined today by Tom Nucky, National Toll Technology Director from Atkins, a member of the SNC Lavalin Group. Toll 101 was designed to educate a variety of audiences to the unique characteristics and value of tolling as part of the approach to finance, build, and operate viable transportation solutions in North America.
Today, most funding for highway maintenance and expansion comes from state and federal gas taxes. These funds have run low and are expected to continue to diminish, primarily because cars have become more fuel efficient. Though some states have increased their gas taxes, the federal tax on gasoline hasn't changed since 1993. Federal taxes go into a fund dedicated to transportation called the Highway Trust Fund. Since 2008, this fund has gone into the red. It's up to Congress to figure out what to do about the federal trust fund. But states have similar trust funds with the same problems. We believe tolling is a very important part of the overall solution of the surface transportation problems facing virtually every urban area in North America.
Toll 101 is divided into 7 segments that are introductory in nature. They're not designed for experts or to make you an expert. They should be perfect for those interested in a high-level view of the toll industry, how tolling works, the different approaches to toll technology and operations, things that would give someone a good basic understanding of the toll business.
This series will be ideal for engineering and planning students or new hires for toll and transportation agencies, or for the companies that support these types of public agencies. This education would also be beneficial for elected and appointed public officials who are involved in transportation.
So you can watch this series sequentially, or you can watch each section individually, depending upon your interests. Again, thank you to Tom Nucky from Atkins for helping me present Toll 101. And I hope you find this material helpful in better understanding tolling and transportation in North America. Hello, this is Section 1 of Toll 101, Toll Organizations, Facilities, and Financing. And today we're going to be looking at the federal-state partnership, toll agency organization. We'll be looking at how toll agencies are overseen. We'll be looking at some of the different types of toll facilities and a little bit on toll financing. When we look at the federal-state partnership, this is really an important piece for understanding how toll roads fit into surface transportation. The federal-state partnership is about how the feds not only work with the states, but also with local governments. And when you look at the federal side of the ledger, you find that there are 3 basic organizations who are involved: US DOT, Federal Highway Administration, and the Federal Transit Administration. And the misunderstanding about these organizations is that they're involved in delivering transportation. Actually, they're not involved in delivering any transportation. That's really done at the state level. What the DOT does through the Federal Highway Administration and FTA is that they provide the funding, and that funding is generally developed through formulas that come out of legislation from the US Congress. The feds do develop standards, they come up with requirements, and they do provide some oversight, specifically on major projects, but they really do not build, they don't design, they don't deliver any projects. That's really done at the state level. The state departments of transportation are invested with the responsibility to implement projects. They plan the projects, they develop the funding for projects, which generally come through their state legislatures. They do get federal funds mixed in with those funds, but they are responsible for planning, for designing, and for delivering all of the transportation projects within their state, other than those that have been delegated to local communities. And every state's a little bit different about how they organize and govern how transportation funds are spent. At the local level, transportation planning is generally vested in urban areas within a metropolitan planning organization, or within another organization very similar known as a council of government, or a COG. At the city and county level, that's where most planning and public works are done. And then there are local and regional toll authorities, as well as transit agencies, and there are regional transportation and mobility authorities. So at the local level, you'll find a wide range of different organizations that put their fingers right into the delivery of transportation. At the state level, the states, either through their state toll agencies or through separate state organizations, deliver toll-financed facilities. The feds have little or anything to do with tolling. In fact, they don't even have rules related to toll facilities, other than where you can toll on certain federal highways and where you cannot. So this federal-state partnership is important because of this misunderstanding that often occurs that the federal government delivers projects. If there's anything that anybody takes from this segment, if there's one thing you walk away with, is that understanding that the design, planning, delivery of projects is vested at the state level. Tom?
Yeah, that's right, Marty. And I think a good point to look at here is about 29, I think the current number, 28, 29 states have tolling. And so tolling is fairly distributed across the U.S. from east to west. And within those states, as you mentioned, there's a lot of different structure. And we're going to talk about the structure of the agencies now that deliver the toll projects. So we have state DOTs, the Department of Transportations of individual states. We have state agencies, which are part of the state, and typically those are like turnpikes or authorities or enterprises that are part of the state mechanism. And then we have agencies of the state, which are a little nuanced on a state agency. It's created under legislature as a given entity, but not a state agency. And then we have multi-jurisdictional agencies. That's a mouthful, isn't it? And we'll talk about those between different states. And then we have independent regional or local agencies as well that focus just on the local needs of that area. And then we have a nuance in that we have different private providers in the toll market too that are chartered typically under legislation or the rules of the state. And so there's a lot of different flavors of toll organizations, and we're going to take a look at a few on the next few slides. So this is a graphic of the state DOTs, the Department of Transportations that also operate toll roads, and that can be a separate group within the Department of Transportation but still under the DOT umbrella, or it can be directly distributed throughout the DOT organization. Examples of Florida's Turnpike, the Texas Department of Transportation has a toll operation division, Utah, Virginia has a long-standing toll part of their DOT. This is a fairly common method for larger transportation organizations that are used to delivering large projects throughout an entire state network.
Some of the oldest toll agencies we have are really through the DOTs, the New Jersey Turnpike, the Massachusetts Turnpike, and in the New Hampshire area, those toll facilities up there are really some of the oldest in the U.S. And then some of the newest. You mentioned Utah, but also MinPass. And what I find interesting about state DOTs is that you think about the state being a very large organization, and some of these are the largest turnpikes in the country, but they're also some of the smallest. MinPass and UDOT, I think, are maybe two of the smallest toll agencies in the United States.
And they're a nuanced part of the DOT. Typically, a DOT is used to delivering transportation, roadways. The tolls, as we mentioned, has more customer interfaces, account management, et cetera. So it's a different part of a DOT.
There's a different mentality at the state level when it comes to transportation. Toll agencies see the problems on the roadway as opportunities, and certainly financial opportunities. Whereas DOTs, I think, when they're working on non-toll roads, see congestion and problems on the roadway as just problems that need to be solved. And that different mentality, that customer mentality that toll operators have, doesn't really exist in a lot of DOTs.
Good point. The next slide shows state agencies. These would be public turnpikes or authorities or enterprises that are chartered by the state. And a couple of good examples of these might be the Pennsylvania Turnpike, which we often refer to as the grandfather of all toll roads. It was the first major toll road in the modern U.S. And then we can see other examples throughout the country. Maine Turnpike is a good example, as well as Georgia, State Road Toll Authority in Georgia. And these operate under the state rules and state statutes, but they're somewhat separate from the DOTs.
And then there are agencies of the state, and this might seem like a play on words, but these are agencies that are created by the state legislature, but they are not state agencies. They often operate under a set of rules that are different. They may operate completely different from any of either the DOT or the turnpikes that are state agencies. They're much more independent. In Texas, these are mostly known as RMAs, Regional Mobility Authorities, that are created by the Texas legislature. In Florida, the Expressway Authorities, Tampa, the Central Florida Expressway Authority, are created by special acts of the legislature. But one of the largest toll agencies in the U.S., MTA Bridges and Tunnels, happens to have been created by a special act of the New York legislature, and they operate as an agency of the state, but very independent from New York DOT.
And I think a good point to add to that is these are the first type that we've talked about that typically have board of directors that are often public officials or appointed officials that help oversee the governance and provide the connection to the public. Also, I want to point out that, as you said, they follow different rules. That can mean different procurement rules as well. So they do their business differently than the DOTs do.
When it comes to multi-jurisdictional agencies, this is kind of like a hodgepodge of groups, because every one of these is managed by more than one political jurisdiction.
Mm-hmm. So it means often cases these will be between two different states, maybe bridge crossings between different states, like the Port Authority in New York and New Jersey. And they serve both states' interests in making sure that people from both states can travel back and forth. They help provide the toll roads, bridges, et cetera, to do that. But they're also sometimes given charters to do more than just toll roads or tunnels. They also do ports, airports, seaports, and sometimes even economic development. Like the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey is involved in the World Trade Center complex there in the new Liberty One. They own the real estate there.
Some of these have always been interesting to me because their names tend to make you think they are one thing, and then they turn out to be something else. The Delaware River Bridge Port Authority, DERPA, has really nothing to do with the state of Delaware. It's really between New Jersey and Pennsylvania. The Ohio River Bridges have nothing to do with the state of Ohio. It's a set of bridges between Indiana and Kentucky that happen to go over the Ohio River. So you can't always look at the name and figure out who the multiple agencies are. Then you have these really interesting agencies between Canada and the U.S. The Thousand Island Bridge Authority is a local authority in New York State that happens to be managed with Canada. And then in Detroit, you have the tunnel that's really two cities, Windsor and Detroit, who own 50% of that tunnel that crosses the border. And the operator there really works for both jurisdictions.
And the governance has to represent both areas too.
Yeah,
so.
makes for very interesting management. Independent regional and or local agencies, there's an awful lot of these in the U.S.
And these can vary in form from a local county government, such as Lee County in Florida, which their toll operation is part of their county government, to more independent authorities like the North Texas Tollway Authority, one of the earliest toll authorities in the country. And these really have a heavy flavor for local input because they're right there in the community. All the toll dollar generated at that toll facility goes right back into the local community. So these have a lot of local input and serve the local urgent needs of the community, probably are in a much direct form than some of the bigger ones might.
What's interesting about these independent agencies probably is California. Out in California, the DOT is not involved in tolling at all. The state's really not involved at all. They are all, I think there's 12 agencies out there now. All of them are independent regional or local agencies. Now, they may operate under some kind of state charter, and there are certainly state rules. I think their transponder rules are governed by the state legislature. But every one of these is an independently managed organization. Some of them are county. LA Metro is county government. SR 91 is 2 counties, I think. Octa is Orange County and Riverside County. Right. In the Bay Area, you have Bay Area Toll Authority, which manages 7 of the bridges that go back and forth between Oakland and San Francisco.
And then you have Golden Gate on the other side.
Right, and you have Golden Gate all by itself. So it's California is a really interesting area when it comes to tolling.
I think the one we haven't spoken about yet is really the private providers and how they provide tolling in the U.S. And it's a little bit different for a private provider. Their charter is usually an explicit contract that they enter into with whatever the governmental organization is that oversees them, and they have to follow the terms of that contract very closely. We see a lot of examples of these. These are actually fairly new, I think, in transportation as far as the toll side of it. And it's where the partnership, as Marty mentioned before, is not just a partnership between governmental pieces of a community, but also between the private sector. And the private sector is called upon to take on some of the risk with the appropriate reward. And the reward is usually the toll payment that's paid as a prescribed amount and regulated.
So these contracts tend to be very different in the way they're organized. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. ETR 407 was one of the earlier versions of this. That's actually in Toronto, and that project's been on the ground, I think, since the 1990s. Mm-hmm. The ones here in Florida are all fairly new. I-595 in Fort Lauderdale and the Miami Tunnel are both privately funded, as well as design build type projects and operations. And of course, Ultimate I-4 in Orlando is one of these. But when you look deep into these contracts, you do realize that every one of these still reports to some public entity, so that there is complete public control.
And these are long-term contracts that typically go for 50 or more years to the entity. So they operate typically, they operate the road and manage the road and provide the services.
Now, there are a very small number of private organizations in the U.S. that actually own the toll road. And when I say own, I really do mean own. American Roads, I think, owns 4 projects in Alabama. They were originally developed by private developers who wanted to open up areas for development, had to build their own bridges and roadways leading into these developments. And then at some point in time, they ended up selling it to American Roads. So those facilities are actually owned and operated. The tolls that are collected go 100% to the private owners. There are instances of these around the U.S. Richmond has a famous bridge called the Nickel Bridge. I don't think it's been a nickel for a long, long time. But it was a privately owned bridge that was built by privateers who wanted to reduce the time trip on the north side of Richmond for people who were trying to get down into the city. So in terms of oversight of these agencies, they come in a lot of flavors too.
They do.
There are all kinds of governance. You had mentioned it earlier. Very often, these agencies do have independent boards. Their MPOs are sometimes involved. Like for example, out in San Diego, SANDAG is a council of government in the San Diego area. They're responsible. They oversee all of the tolling in San Diego. It's not unusual to see cities or counties and elected boards directly involved. Lee County is one of those here in Florida. So they really do come in all kinds of flavors. It's interesting to me on the DOT side how little oversight there seems to be on some of these really large turnpikes. They're just another department within the Department of Transportation within those states.
Okay, now we're going to talk a little bit about different types of toll facilities. And so we've got traditional toll facilities, which most people think of as a road or a highway, a motorway, a bridge, or a tunnel. And that's the traditional, what we've seen most toll facilities in the U.S. be over the last 75 years. And in the last 10 to 15 years, a new type of toll facility has come around, and those are known as the high occupancy toll lanes, or also express lanes. We kind of group these two into what we call managed lanes, but they're somewhat unique. So a high occupancy toll lane means if there's multiple people in the car, you're only going to get charged, say, for a multiple person rate, which sometimes is free or a reduced price, versus a single occupant in the car. And these lanes are set up to really move more people in the corridor to encourage high occupancy of people in the vehicles to get more people through the corridor, but also to allow single occupant users to use the corridor as well at a premium price. Then the next flavor of that would be the express lanes. And the express lanes are not, they don't typically offer an HOV, high occupancy component at all. It's simply you pay to get into that lane, and the agency manages the traffic in that lane, usually by varying the price, whether it's time of day or variable congestion pricing. And so those lanes are becoming very popular. I would say most of the new toll facilities in this country right now are either HOT or express lanes. In fact, we're going to go through some examples in a minute on those.
So the hot lanes, my experience is that the vast majority of those are conversions of what started out as HOV lanes, and either they failed, they didn't really address congestion and they got overloaded, or just the opposite. Hardly anybody was using them, so to encourage more utilization, the local agency or whoever governed that HOV lane would place a toll on it to allow single occupant vehicles to use those lanes. So I don't see very many hot lanes being built as new projects.
Right. Those are mostly conversions of those old diamond lanes. So other types of toll facilities, we talked about the traditional ones, the urban expressways. So urban expressways, you see those in a metropolitan area where the community has come up with a need for developing high-speed limited access highway from throughout the city, throughout the urban area. Those are pretty common in large urban areas. We also see the rural turnpikes and expressways. These are typically turnpikes that run from one city to the other. An example might be the New York State Thruway, which runs from western New York to eastern New York to down into New York City itself, as well as corridors throughout Florida, and much of the states have these rural urban turnpikes. The third category would be bridges and tunnels. And bridges and tunnels are unique in that they don't operate typically a network of roads. They're simply a crossing over a waterway or under a waterway. And there's a lot of older facilities that started out as bridges and tunnels, and the toll is very much needed to maintain those facilities that require a lot of maintenance and upgrades over time.
Yeah, bridges and tunnels tend to be extremely expensive projects to build and maintain, and that's why they have a toll, because it's dedicated not only to repaying the cost of construction, but also the continued maintenance.
And the last category under traditional facilities are interstate highways. And so you might be surprised, you think interstate highways, my toll has been paid by a tax, by the gas tax, but that's not the case. A lot of the interstate highways were built or upgraded on urban or rural toll corridors. So the toll road was already there. The interstate in its planning effort determined that was the best use of that right-of-way was to brand that an interstate as well, and therefore the toll road is grandfathered in to those.
There's a lot of these, especially in the eastern part of the United States. The I-95 corridor, if you drive, I think you recently did that, yeah. From Washington to New York.
I think it cost me a lot of money to get from New York to Florida on the interstate.
It certainly is. There's also new capacity, new projects on the interstate.
And this is where the federal law that you mentioned earlier comes in, because the federal law currently allows for new capacity on an interstate to be tolled, but not tolling the existing capacity. So an example might be these these heavy urban projects that are really constricted, but they need to grow. They need more lanes. An example here in Orlando is the I-4 Ultimate job, where they're building 2 toll lanes in each direction. They're going to be managed, dynamically priced, or time of day priced, such that those new lanes are tolled, but the previous existing lanes are not tolled.
The reason for taking this approach is that most states, and I think virtually all states, are now into this predicament of not having enough money to maintain their existing systems. They don't have any excess money at all to build new transportation. So tolling is one of the tools that allows states and urban areas to move forward and build transportation today for the needs today as well as tomorrow, using funds that are really paid back over time. One of the more interesting parts of the federal statute is Section 129. And this is being used now in Rhode Island on Interstate 95. But Section 129 is about 100 years old. It's an old statute on the books that allows tolls to be placed on a federal highway if they're there to fix a bridge, and the tolls have to be dedicated directly to that reconstruction. Rhode Island, and Rhode Island's not alone. There are
But they're the first to do this.
They're the first to do it, but they're not alone in terms of their problem. There are a lot of small states in the U.S. that are on interstate corridors that have a lot of pass-through traffic. These are trips that where the travelers don't stop, they don't buy any gas in the state, they're not paying any fuel taxes to the state of Rhode Island, but they are tearing up the roads that Rhode Island is required to maintain. It got so bad in Rhode Island, they were at the bottom of the list. They had more structurally deficient bridges than any other state in the U.S. And these couple of these pictures show the kind of physical shoring up that was being done underneath the Rhode Island bridges just to keep them in operation. And these are on I-95. The real problem is trucks. While this kind of shoring can support automotive traffic, trucks, extremely heavy semi-trailer type trucks, can be a real problem. So what Rhode Island has done is they have instituted all electronic tolling related to these locations throughout Rhode Island that are on one side or the other of these bridges, and they are specifically tolling trucks only. A lot of states are watching this because there are other states that fall into this category, not having the funds to maintain or fix their interstate, and this looks like an opportunity that other people are going to follow up on. So the hot lanes, they're pretty interesting. They're fairly new.
They are new, about the last 10 to 15 years, and a lot of them have come about, again, to look at ways to move customers in heavily congested corridors, to get more people in the vehicle, to get a discount, incentivize that with a discount for vehicles that have more people in them, but then sell off that extra capacity to the single occupancy user. And so we saw these really start out in California with SR 91 over a decade ago, which was a 10-mile facility from point A to point B, basically. But that idea, that at that time, which was a private venture, that idea is now kind of promulgated its way across the country. Specifically, there's some major projects in the DC area with Virginia DOT that service the Metro DC area with these high occupancy lanes and express lanes. And this is really the new type of mobility we're seeing put into these old interstate corridors to kind of get more capacity through, to revitalize them, and to, most importantly, try to provide a more reliable experience for the customer that's willing to pay the toll to get into that lane, whether it's getting to work quicker or getting home quicker, or picking up a child from daycare. Those are the examples that are commonly used. And there's a misconception out there that these lanes are only for the people in the expensive, high bracket earnings area. That's not the case. A lot of studies have been done to find out that these lanes are used by the broad base of people who find the value of that time and the need to get to that point reliably on their trip, and they're willing to pay for that.
And they're just not there for revenue. They're also there to mitigate congestion, to try and improve and provide some reliability, trip reliability for the people that are using these lanes. Express lanes are a little bit different animal.
Express lanes are built really to oftentimes enhance the capacity of the corridor, and they're really intended just for those people that are willing to pay to use the lane. They're managed somewhat similarly by congestion or time of day as well, but they're often significant added capacity to a corridor. A new facility, an example would be the Tampa-Hillsborough Expressway that you were very involved in, where you built 3 lanes that reversed from day to night. And so you could remove 3 lanes in the morning to move people into the metro area, and then reverse in 3 lanes on the outbound side in the evenings to move people out. And the express lanes are also a new area of expansion and transportation. We're seeing some toll facilities now that are being retrofitted with express lanes to add more capacity in the center that can be managed.
These projects, while they certainly provide congestion relief, their main focus is that they have to generate enough revenue to pay for themselves.
Right.
So in that respect, they're a little bit like a traditional toll road, where they have to cover whatever their capital cost was, as well as their operations and maintenance, whereas some hot lane facilities really
only cover
don't
their
need to do that.
operations in some cases. Yep.
So in terms of financing, it looks to me like, and neither one of us are really financing experts, but there's an awful lot of tools that we use in tolling to finance and fund these facilities.
Revenue bonds are the most traditional one, and that's almost like a mortgage on your house, where a toll agency will take a loan out, and those loans are sold publicly on the market, and those loans have to be paid back over an increment of time, typically 30 years or more. And so that's like a mortgage for your house, but you're mortgaging the construction of the road, and those mortgages are paid back, those bonds are paid back by the tolls. And so that's the most common way. The requirements that dictate how those tolls are paid back and at what time and what the priorities of payback are all deemed in the covenants, what we call covenants of the bonds, the bond covenants.
Some of those covenants even define how rates are set. I mean, they can get very specific in dictating to the toll agency how they manage their business related to that particular facility and those bonds. I know that taking this traditional revenue bonding approach will allow agencies to often move a project forward by 10 to 20 years, so that if an urban area has no funding to build a needed project, they could sit for 10 or 20 years waiting to accumulate the tax revenue to be able to build that. But by bonding a project like a toll road in that time frame, they can move that project to the community 20 years earlier.
It's like using a savings account where you accumulate money, or you use a loan to get the money up front and build it and then open it up to the customers sooner. So yeah, and there's other methods of combining funds, federal and state bond programs. There's certain bonds that are available and discounts available through the federal government or other state programs where you can take loans out. There's grants available in some cases from the federal or state governments to either start a toll project or to start the construction of it.
I know we always loved grants because you don't have to pay back grants generally.
But you really have to explain what you do. So we also have state infrastructure banks, which some states have created a bank unto themselves where they loan money out to local organizations to build the toll road, and then over time they collect that money back. And so instead of involving a private procurement of the money, it's actually done in the state's interest. So that's
kind of creates a revolving fund.
Revolving fund
that in some states, not just toll roads, but you can use it for any revenue generating, like a water project or anything that generates revenue. It can and can pay back the loan.
And then we have private-public partnerships, and these public-private partnerships are where the two entities come together, and one will provide the financing or part of the financing, and one will do the construction and operations. So these are direct fixed contracts written up legally with the private vendors or entities. And we also see these termed as concession type agreements, where there's spelled out terms as to how the operator will operate and build and construct the road over time. And these are long-term contracts, and once the ink is dried on these, they're very difficult to change for either the governmental organization or the private organization. and there's risk and rewards in these. And sometimes there's cases when the private organization can't fulfill their side, and the road asset comes back over to the public entity. And so these are very contractually driven, but the ultimate, if the private sector is involved, they're involved for a profit margin. That's where the tolls pays for that.
I think the P3 market is one that we're going to see a lot more activity in the U.S. It is a model that has been used extensively in Europe. Most of what we would call interstate highways in this country, the A1, the A series highways in France and Spain and Italy are virtually all built with some type of toll concession. Sometimes it's a contractual model, but most of the time there is a revenue risk associated with the toll operator, where the operator puts up the funding to build and operate the roadway, has to maintain the roadway at a certain level, so they're still answering to a public entity, but the tolls and all of the toll revenue really come to that operator. So if traffic volume is down, they assume the risk of that revenue, and if it goes up and they make excess profits, they all smile at the end of the day. But it's a model that we're starting to see come into the U.S. I think the best known of these projects is one of the projects in Virginia going in and out of Washington. The express lanes on I-95, I think, is a revenue model for the company that has that concession.
That's right. And again, we should probably just emphasize that toll roads are not funded by taxes by and large. They're funded by the user fee. And the users make the choice to pay the amount of money to travel the road. And as we've talked about before, the reason that is there's just a short supply of tax revenue. The gas tax in the federal level has not gone up since 1993. It's stuck at that level. And so communities and transportation officials are trying to find ways to meet the needs. And that involves tolls and user fee-based roads, whether they're private or public.
Thank you, Tom. So in this segment of Toll 101, we've had a look at the federal-state partnership. We talked a little bit about how toll agencies are organized, how they are very different across the U.S. We talked just a little bit about how they're managed and overseen. And we've looked at some of the different kinds of toll facilities and the different approaches to toll financing. I hope you all found that interesting. I'm Marty.
And I'm Tom.
And thank you very much for joining us, and hopefully you'll watch another one of our segments on Toll 101. This program is made possible through funding provided by Aegis Projects, Inc., and with the additional cooperation of Atkins, Valencia College in Orlando, Florida, and Patterson-Bach Communications.